I think we lost Andrews.
And
I see it.
okay,
There you go.
sounds good. I do apologize, everyone, for that delay. My name is Robert. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm a 40-year-old man. So I had a little bit of a learning curve. So I thank everyone for their patience, and I'm sorry for the delay in getting starting, but welcome to Behind the Scene. I am super excited about tonight's discussion, and what's going to happen is I'm just going to do a little bit of an intro. However, our moderator is going to lead the further discussion, and should be great. So first and foremost, we do want to start off with gratitude and respect that Max Ottawa acknowledges that we operate on the traditional, unceded, and unsurrendered territories of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. We know that this land is home to many diverse Indigenous, First Nations, Métis, and Inuit folks, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work here. In addition to, if you're familiar with Max's strategic plan, we're very committed to listening and also learning from our Indigenous 2SLGBTQ plus family members. So it's really with great honor and pleasure that we're really happy to host tonight's Behind the Scene, prioritizing 2SLGBTQ plus Indigenous health needs. Now, we know COVID is impacting all of us in unique ways. And unfortunately, we're seeing a lot of the downsides of the inequalities and at the intersections of our health, or really not just our healthcare systems, but all of the systems in general. And so this is especially true for Indigenous family members, particularly regarding mental health, sexual health, and safety. However, it's very important that people are able to narrate their own stories and share what they need to support their own health and wellness needs. And that's what we're hoping to hear from tonight's conversation. So I'm really honored to have Howard Adler here, who's going to serve as our moderator. He is the co-director, founder, and programmer for the Asinabka Film Festival. Joining him will be Duane Morrisseau Beck, who's a senior policy analyst for the Métis National Council. We also have RJ Jones, who's a multimedia artist, educator, and full spectrum doula, and Andrew Martin, who's an artist and actor known for his lead role in the 2014 feature film Fire Song. Now our panelists will introduce themselves further into the discussion, but just wanted to give you a little taste of who we had on board. And so I will be hiding my video after the introduction, but I will be monitoring the Facebook feed. So if anyone has any questions, please feel free to push those through. And at the end of tonight's discussion, we'll have some room for Q&A. And you know, please be respectful to the questions that you ask. We want to always be mindful of that. And lastly, I'm just going to share a couple Max announcements so that way when the discussion is over, we can all go about our evening. So many might be aware, but at Max, we recently launched our peer support program. We have dedicated hours during the week in which if you need a little bit of support, you can either schedule an appointment or phone in, and we have volunteers who are lending a listening ear and will offer appropriate resources if requested to help get guys in the area through this difficult time. We also have many great volunteer positions, and we're also presently hiring a harm reduction program coordinator. And you can check all of that at our website, maxottawa.ca. The peer support program information is under programs, and the volunteer and employment information is under Get Involved. So enough out of me. You're here to see our guest panelists. I'm going to hide my screen, and you all have a great presentation.
All right, thanks, Robert. I'm really excited to talk with everybody tonight. Bonjour, Ani, Howard Indishnikas, Wabjashin Dodem, Lesata Kong Donjaba, Wabjashin Dodem, Bamatis, Nongom. My name's Howard. I live in Ottawa, and I'm currently at my older brother's place in Eugenia, Ontario. I've been isolating here for the past couple of weeks, and it's nice to get out of the city and helping my brother with the restaurant that he has here. So I thought we could just start with, if everybody could just maybe do a quick introduction of themselves, and then tell us where you're isolating, where you're located. Oh, I should mention that I'm on the territory of the Petun people, or I'm probably saying this wrong, but the Tionon Tati, who were the Indigenous people of this area in the Collingwood area, and they were displaced. Yeah, just want to throw that in there. But yeah, so who wants to go first? Duane, how about you?
Thanks, Howard. Good evening, everyone. I'm Duane Morrisseau Beck. I'm actually holding up in my territory, the Métis Nation and Treaty 1 territory in Winnipeg, Manitoba, the historical Red River settlements. And I live in Ottawa presently and work for the Métis National Council as was told. And I guess I'm working still, and living in a COVID world and trying to adjust my work and my life around this new normal. So I'm just grateful to be able to be here with you guys, and I look forward to a good conversation. Thanks.
How about you, RJ? How are you doing? Where are you located? How's isolation going?
I'm currently isolating on Algonquin territory, so I'm in Ottawa right now. I've been doing the whole self-isolating thing for the last couple of months at this point. I've been really experimenting with like online communications and online technology. So that's something that I think I'm going to gain significantly more skills like throughout this time, but still doing my like day-to-day work with like Planned Parenthood, which is a like sexual health-based organization. So also exploring like sexual health and what that looks like also in COVID time, since there's not really a map for what it's like to exist in a pandemic, but I'm doing good.
It's Andrew here. Oh, there he is. So Andrew, do you want to just do a quick intro of yourself and tell us how you're keeping up with where you're isolating, and if you're working or not still, and yeah.
Yeah, for sure. My name is Andrew Martin. I'm a Mohawk actor, originally from Six Nations of the Grand River Territory. Currently, I'm isolating in Toronto, on the territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit Nation, close to my home community of the Six Nations of the Grand River. And I am currently just trying my best to hold it down and wait this out as best I can. Unfortunately, both the industries that I work in came to a standstill as soon as the pandemic hit, both being acting and retail, as well as restaurant management. So yeah, but I'm holding down all right now. I'm doing all right. And yeah, it's honestly just been adjusting from running from one place to another to having nowhere to go. So yeah, like, I mean, I'm doing all right, so I can't complain too much.
I'm super excited I have so many questions for you all. I'm really excited to get into some of the heavy issues that I want to talk about with you all. But first, maybe start things off with a lighter topic, maybe, or a more, I don't know, a funner topic maybe. So let's talk about sex. So how are you guys holding? How do I phrase this? Are you guys like, do you have partners? Are you isolating together? Are you sexting? Are you doing online dating? Feel free to not answer these things if you don't want to. I thought we'd just start things off with a bit of a lighter, a funner topic. if you want. We can skip this question if you guys don't want.
Can we turn the question back on you?
Sure. Yeah, we can do that. I was in Ottawa for a month in my basement apartment in Duane there with my partner, and we were, isolating in a basement apartment with not much light. And so now I past 2 weeks I've been here in Virginia. No sexting, but just video chatting, calling my partner. But it's nice to be here because I can go for a walk and not worry about running into like a lot of people in the city. It's a lot less stressful being out in the country. So, but yeah, so that's my answer to the question. Did I miss anything? So no online dating for me. I'm taking. How about you guys?
Well, I'm about 2,000 kilometers away from my husband, and so it's video conferencing and just chatting back and forth. I think we're far beyond the sexting and the video playing around. I think it's just more of both of us are sort of dealing with the loneliness, even though we're with family. I think this is the longest we've ever been apart in the 11 or 12 years that we've been together. So that really is playing on the mental health and emotional wellness. And I think those of us that are single, that are not, do not have partners, are, they're probably very lonely, given the unprecedented changes in our lives. We're so free to be able to go do, I was looking forward to just going for a ride to go get the gas. Like that was an exciting time for me because I was completely petrified and very worried about what direction this is and may possibly go. And so, the conversations I'm having with my husband is, don't go out anywhere, be careful, don't touch your face. We're not really in the mindset of sexual, intimacy kind of discussions. Are really about, trying to self-preserve and preserve ourselves and make sure that we both don't get ill. We're both we're in our 50s. And I live with multiple health conditions, and so it's pretty stressful for the both of us. So, but I do miss him, and sexual contact and intimacy is a very important part of our relationship. And so, being able to not actually have that, or even just have that close physical contact, is definitely gnawing away at my emotional and mental wellness and my physical needs.
Right. Thanks for sharing that, Duane. You guys want to jump in on this one?
Yeah, definitely. I live with my partner, and I find the both of us will occasionally work from home. And I think in the beginning of the pandemic was really stressful because my partner was away from the country, and the trying to get back to Canada was incredibly hard, and we didn't really have any kind of timeline in terms of what that looked like. And I think that kind of stress already in a very stressful situation caused a lot of issues in the beginning. And I find too, I feel like I spent the first couple of weeks on my own, and then transitioning and watching another person experience how the pandemic is in a Canada context was also difficult. But I think overall, I have friends who have been self-isolating for months, and they're alone. And every time I talk to them, like they said, like, yeah, I don't think I've hugged or had any kind of human contact in months. And it makes me feel like, even though like sometimes it can be hard being like isolated together, it's still super important to like recognize that I also am super lucky to have my partner, but also like I have friends who also live in my building who we've been able to like self-isolate together in the very beginning. And I think those are also like really like different circumstances than a lot of folks. And also like, yeah, generally I don't think I have felt like lonely really throughout this period, which is very different. And I find too, like I have friends who have talked to me about like, what does dating look like during COVID times? And it's like at this point, like 0 to 100, literally. I know people who are like shacking up with folks at a super like quick rate, because it's like, well, it's either like we don't see each other or we see each other and kind of do the self-isolating thing together. But also in terms of like being able to survive and having another human presence. So like I understand why people are making these kinds of decisions. But yeah, I have like because I work in sexual health, like these have been some kind of topics that I've definitely been exploring. And also like how do you practice like safer sex when we're not really just worried about getting STIs? It's a whole other game when we're also including this global like virus that is killing lots of people, and information comes out constantly and every day. But yeah, like I can't also ignore though, like throughout this period, there is also like a huge rate of violence that are also like we're starting to see in all of our communities. So like I'm again, like I have it really easy. I'm super lucky to be with a really in a loving household, really. And we've definitely invited some of our a friend of ours too to stay with us, because she was literally alone for the past couple of months. And I think at some point we're going to have to transition into doing like communal living at some point. So I know that like that's a more sustainable way of living. So I think it's been giving me a lot of like thought and process to think about what does creating a family look like in a non-conventional way, being like also LGBTQ, but also going back to like Indigenous roots. But yeah, I'm really lucky during this period of time in not actually having to struggle with loneliness. And also, yeah, I had surgery, and I still had like 3 people able to take care of me through that process, while like I had an emergency tooth extraction as well, and I'll talk about more navigating healthcare. But I'm really lucky in terms of like, yeah, I definitely find I just don't think about intimacy as much, just because I feel like a hyper awareness in other ways and just being nervous. And I think too, like intimacy doesn't always necessarily have to involve sex, and we're also just going through really, really emotional times together. And I think that's a different type of intimacy. It's also very tiring. But yeah, I'm enjoying myself regardless, and it's really nice though. I have it really lucky though. So
Sure. Brought up a few topics that I hope we can address later on, but let's move on to Andrew and see if Andrew can jump in and tell us about how your relationship's looking at this moment. Any online dating or sexting?
Um, so I'm not gonna lie, like even as a teenager, I wasn't too big on the whole sexting thing. Like I just never got it. Was never really into it. It was just completely lost on me. But my current relationship status being taken, and then in the midst of the whole COVID thing, I think was strengthened. I have a bit of a unique experience, I think, that's spread out through, I think, a population, because prior to COVID, I was seeing someone, or I had began seeing someone very close to the beginning of COVID. And then I decided, and we decided to take a vacation to Florida, in the days that that led up to the lockdowns. So upon our return, we returned the Sunday before all the lockdowns happened, and then we ended up like what ended up happening is that the plan that I had was to stay in Toronto for one night, and then I was supposed to return to Ottawa. However, that didn't play out because the lockdowns had happened. Travel was kind of restricted. And then, of course, we had been abroad, and so we were taking responsibility for that. So right away, as soon as we got back on the Sunday night, we just kind of relaxed because we were both tired. And then the next day, as soon as everything was open, we went out, we got everything we needed, and then it was isolation for the next 2 weeks. So in that time, you know, it kind of I think it bonded us in the best way possible, because all of a sudden we're thrown into a situation where nerves are flaring, where, you know, anxiety is flaring, and, you know, there's nowhere to go. There's nowhere to really go off and vent that. And so we both took it really well, I'm going to honestly say, because it was just, we both kind of looked at it as like, well, this is our current situation. And there's nothing we can do about it. There's, like, you know, as much as we as humans want to have control over everything, there's literally not a damn thing that we can do about it. So it was just like that. Okay, well, what's within our control? Well, we can keep ourselves safe. We can control the environment that we're living in right now, which is the living environment, which is, you know, cooking for ourselves, which is, you know, just taking care of ourselves on a daily basis and finding routines that, I guess, just kind of help us through everything. And so for me, it was just a bit of an adjustment going, like, you know, going from traveling cross country, coming back to Canada, and then all of a sudden not being able to return home right away. And then being somewhere where I am cohabitating with somebody for the first time in a while. And then coming out of it upon my return to Ottawa to try and make my move to Toronto, which was scheduled for the beginning of May, and then subsequently fell apart. And then coming back to try and figure things out. So it's been a bit of a journey, but I can honestly say there hasn't been too many stressful parts to it in terms of figuring things out. I think the only stressful part of it is just like, yes, when we do have to go out, we do have to, you know, go get food. We do have to go and find things. I think that's really the most stressful part about everything, because again, you don't know what you're coming into contact with, but at the same time, you know, we both kind of accepted the fact that we both travel out of country. We've both been traveling for a while before that. And we don't know who we'd come in contact with. We don't know what we've come in contact with. And, you know, so there's as you know, as uneasy as we were in the beginning, we also kind of allowed ourselves to be like, well, there's no, like, you know, you have to be smart, yes, but there's not a thing that you can really do about transmission in terms of when you've been abroad or when you have returned, and then you all of a sudden have to go and try and scrounge things together, especially during the early days. And then as things continue, there's not really much that you can do except just be smart and be safe. So, and then also for background, both myself and my partner are both Indigenous. We're both actually from the same reserve. We're both Mohawk. And so I think part of that also comes from our very stubborn mindset of being, you know, nobody can really tell me what to do, but I'm also going to be very smart about how I continue from here and about what I do from here. And then also being very caring for family members, being very careful with the people that we're surrounding with. I really hope you guys can all hear this, because it's 7:30 right now, and here in Toronto, and what is it? The shift change is happening right now. So right now, all of the applause is going on around me right now.
Yeah, we can hear that.
Good. I hope you guys can, and I hope, you know, and again, this is just something that we all realize, right? Like, it's just become part of our daily living. Not much control that we have over our lives right now, but at the same time, in the current situation, there's not much that you can do about it, you know?
Well, it sounds like you've gone through a few interesting things in the middle of that pandemic, going on a vacation in the middle of the pandemic, and shacking up with the relatively new partner during the pandemic. Those are all really interesting things to navigate.
No, and the good thing is that luckily, you know, again, I'll bring it back to even myself, like as, you know, as my age, you know, typically, you know, somebody my age would be, you know, saying, fuck this, fuck that. But like the way that I've thought about it is there's not much we can do. And there's just, you know, just accept the limitations of the current time that we're in, and you know, do your best, be smart, and just keep yourself and the people that, if you are cohabitating with people, just keep them safe and think about them as well.
All right, so let's keep moving. I have so many questions and we're just getting into it, but just quickly, can you guys share how you're staying like healthy, either physically, mentally, and how you're maintaining like good relationships during this time? Right, maybe I'll go first really quickly. I was cooking a lot at home, just not eating out very much, and I was eating. So I started eating a vest. Spent a lot of time eating, probably drinking too much alcohol sometimes, but you know, coping mechanisms. That's, you know, I was video chatting with my twin brother. He's in Vancouver with his partner, and we were video chatting and drinking wine like almost every day for a couple weeks there. Bad habits, but that was the way that we were doing it. But yeah, so how about you guys? How are you coping and maintaining healthy states for yourself and healthy relationships with others? Anybody want to answer that?
Sure. Um, so one of the things that I did initially when I ended up returning to Canada from abroad was, it was the initial shock of like, what do I do? How do I go about this? But then um, I also just really thought about it and just like, well, I'm gonna take advantage of this time, because in my life prior, I was a manual laborer. I was a retail manager, and then I was a restaurant manager. You know, so I'm working anywhere between 5 to 6, even sometimes 7 days a week. So I didn't have a lot of time to do a lot of things that, you know, I really enjoyed doing as, you know, like the things that I enjoyed doing in my early 20s, I wasn't really doing as much anymore. Things that I enjoyed doing as a teenager, wasn't really doing too much anymore, which included things like cooking, things like reading, you know, and then even just watching TV, because the majority of the time I just was so damn tired from work that I would just come home, I would just, you know, I would start to relax, you know, I would crack open a beer, and then I would just sit and watch something, and I would usually eat something that was so easily done that it probably wasn't healthy. But then I started doing the things like baking, like intricate cooking. I was raised by a chef who studied, my mother being a chef who studied in Italy for 5 months. So there was a lot of things that I kind of fell away from and that I didn't do anymore, that I was really like, you know what, I want to take advantage of this, regardless of what's going on around me, because no matter what, like if you stay stagnant, you're going to end up falling into a pattern that might not be healthy. And I fully realized that in the early days that you can't do that. And so I started cooking, I started baking, I started reading again, I started watching TV shows that I maybe hadn't watched in a year or two, and TV shows that maybe were just coming out that I wanted to get into but was always falling asleep. So those are things that I was doing to take care of myself. And on top of that, what I was doing was um, forcing myself out and going for walks, going, you know, as scared and as afraid as I was about going outside, especially in those early days. um, I knew that, like, I knew for myself that if you allow that to set in, it's not going to do you any good. And then I just kept telling myself to be smart, be careful, and be thoughtful about what you're doing, what you're touching, where you're going. You know, like because again, it comes back to my thought process of there's not a damn thing you can do about the transmission if you're walking, like, you know, even if you go out into a park, we all know the virus stays on surfaces for anywhere between 1 day to 2 days. So there's not a damn thing we can do about that, but you can be smart about what you're doing. You can be intelligent about what you're touching, where you're going, who you're talking to, and what environments you're putting yourself into. So that's kind of how I really tackled this. And I'm not going to lie, it took me about a week. Like, it took me about a week to kind of piece myself back together again. But in the end, it was like, just being conscious about what's good for you. And then if you are cohabitating with someone, what's good for them and what's good for the people surrounding you and them, then, things will be okay. Because before this, I was working retail. I'm touching things, and I'm interacting with people who have been 1,000 different places before they walk into my store. I'm working in a restaurant. Again, same thing. People have been 1,000 different places and touched 1,000 different things and interacted with so many more people before they ended up with me. And, there's not much that you can do about that until you are being conscious. And so that's just something that I've kind of carried with myself throughout this time. And there are obvious changes to the way that I carry out my day-to-day activities, the way that I carry about my life now. But ultimately, one of the things that I have not let rule me is the fear of everything going on around me. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's just, in my mind, it's being cautious, being mindful, and being careful, but not letting everything take hold of, letting fear rule what you do and how you go about your life. And I'm hoping this is making some type of sense to somebody out there.
Yeah, so it's good I was already a germaphobe before everything started, so this is just like exacerbated my already germophobic thinking. Anyway, some good things you said there. So RJ and Duane, quickly maybe share some of your coping tips for us all. Who wants to go?
I can go first. I'll be honest, like, I find my relationship with alcohol has definitely been like exacerbated during this period, mostly because like I also struggle a lot with like having ADHD, and sometimes it actually is more satisfying to like have a drink than it is to do something that will give me gratification in 35 minutes. So I find readjusting and like having to live with like some of the like invisible like disabilities I have significantly changed the ways that I like exist during this period. And it took me, I would say, like a month to kind of like balance out and figure out how I wanted to like navigate the pandemic. And I think in the beginning it was just really easy to like fall into the like, how long is this going to be, and have a lot of anxiety about that. So of course, like, it's super easy to drink because it's the easiest thing that is like most accessible. So I find like my the amount of money I like spend on alcohol is significantly higher than it's been. But I find too, like, because during this time I also had to get a tooth extracted, so I couldn't do anything for 2 weeks. So I find that also kind of helped me balance out, and I started to like go get back into things that I've loved when I was like a teenager, and getting back into that. So like I used to be really into doing computer science type stuff, and I've been teaching myself how to code and finding ways to create communities online. So I also was one of the many million people in this world who decided to like jump onto Animal Crossing. And honestly, like, I find my drinking has gone significantly down since starting to play like Animal Crossing, because it gives me a type of connection with other people. And even though I'm not physically visiting them, it also feels like there's an element of being able to share time and space of something that is like personable to me and something I put work into. And it's something that I can share with my partner. And I didn't expect to like really launch into like this game, but it has definitely helped create like a sense of community during times where it's really hard to get that. And it's really cute because like throughout my process of like getting dental surgery, I was getting these like letters in Animal Crossing being like, hey, get well soon, I'm going to give you a little virtual gift. And it makes like this whole process of like feeling very alone like less lonely. So I do like spend a lot of time in this game, and so does my partner, who isn't typically like really interested in gaming. So I find like being able to create community in spaces we don't typically see, I think has been the thing that kind of balanced out like the drinking all the time, and then kind of figuring out how do I fill a cup that feels empty, but just doing things in a little things in ways that are like more or less like unconventional. I find like I changed because I know I'm going to be home for the next couple of months. I like changed up my entire like ways that I like work online. I already have back issues, so I invested in stuff for my back with what I wouldn't typically invest in if I wasn't going to be sitting in the same chair for like months at a time. And yeah, just investing in myself and like getting back into doing things like coding and teaching myself new things and like still being able to do art are like the things I feel like I needed. But I also think it felt like a bit of a vacation for the first like couple of weeks. So I'm like, yeah, I can like drink, it doesn't matter. But then after a while, I'm like, wow, this is actually making me more depressed. And also there were like 2 weeks I had to mandatory quarantine with my like partner because that was by law when she got back into the country. Like we had to quarantine. There was no way around that. And also like post having surgery, I was also having to quarantine for 2 weeks again. So not being able to leave the house. So yeah, like things I feel like are always a balance. And I feel like I have a really like fantastic employer who is really understanding during these times. But yeah, like if it wasn't for like I feel my place of employment or like the people around me, and again like being in a unique situation where like my apartment building, there are people in this building that I am friends with and I can go see. Like these are really unique circumstances that I just feel super lucky, and those people have been like very much a part of my supports. But like getting back into like gaming and the games I used to play as like a kid, I'm like replaying them, and I have such a different perspective on things. So it's nice to like re-explore parts of myself that I haven't seen in a really long time. But yeah, again, it was really rocky in the beginning, and I'm not going to lie and be like, oh, it's all perfect, because it's definitely not. Like there are times where I'm just like, yeah, I definitely drink more on some days than others. But I also think too, like that was when my partner wasn't around. And now that my partner is around more often, it's also like I have another human I can be accountable to, versus when she wasn't here, I don't have anyone to be accountable to, so I can do whatever I want. So it feels good to have people around me like hold me accountable, and also to find other ways of coping that doesn't just like launch into drinking all the time. But yeah, it's been a process though. It definitely is and will be continuously up and down, especially because my birthday is in like a week from now. And I'm just like, wow, I'm not excited. And this is like the first time I'm not excited, but it's also because we're just in very different circumstances. But I'm sure I'll figure out something that has to do with like technology and Animal Crossing.
Right. Yeah, I think I can relate to some of those things, especially trying to find healthy activities to focus on rather than drinking. And how, just how easy sometimes it has been for me as well, just to partake of some beverages because, like, hey, I got nothing to do tomorrow, why not? But that's not always the best course. But no judgment on people that have to feel they need to do that sometimes just to cope, right? So how about you, Duane? How are you coping with the situation?
It's kind of funny that you're talking about video games. Probably been a better part of 20 years that I put down the PlayStation 3 or 2 or something like that in racing games. And it's just been recently I started picking it up and started to play video games again. It's just going back and reliving some of my early years, adult years. You know, for me, my life really has changed in minor ways that I'm able to sort of modify because I'm not living at home. I traveled a lot anyway, and I work from home, and I can work pretty much from anywhere. My employer allows me to do that. So, and I was already probably practicing COVID practices, and I've been doing that for a number of years, washing my hands, you know, keeping a flu shot in place, and doing everything I medically can do to preserve this body of mine. But I think it's more, you know, this pandemic has really played on my emotional wellness, and it's been part of the remedy is to really just sort of keep yourself up, create a structure, and you know, my day is really structured. I go for a walk in the morning. I eat my breakfast. I do my work. I go for another walk. I think just getting outside and getting some fresh air and clearing my mind is really helpful, and keeping in contact with people I love. And so I think that's, you know, part of the struggle that we sort of have to do. But for me, I'm just grateful that I'm home. I'm actually with my family, although Craig is not here. I'm with my family, so that really helps a lot to be around, even though under the circumstances. The reason why I'm actually here is because my older brother committed suicide in February. And so I'm sort of here, sort of supporting. We're in the middle of a pandemic, and we're dealing with grief in our family. So just being here together as a family has been really good for maintaining keeping myself above the water. And so I think, you know, when you think about the coping strategies, I think everybody has to sort of go through different modifications and modify. And some of them are major. You know, if you're losing your job, your livelihood, that's a huge jolt to your entire livelihood. And so it's just really, you know, you get through that, but then you're dealing with, you know, isolation, and we're all human beings are a very social animal, right? And so being stuck in your home and being paranoid to be around people is just not the greatest feeling at all. And within our communities, our Indigenous communities, it's our leaders are telling us not to hug and not to, you know, embrace. It's culturally, it's so hard, but you know, we are living in a different world, right? And so, and a part of this pandemic is bringing back the HIV/AIDS. Those feelings, the gay community went through. You know, we've gone through this in a different way, the pandemic, and you know, so those of us that have lived through that pandemic are seeing some similarities around the social economic differences that are playing out, and how that's impacting livelihoods and accessing health. I mean, I went to the dentist. RJ was talking about going to the dentist, and I had to go. I was so paranoid. I was so freaked out. I was having an anxiety attack because I'm like, oh my God, what? Like, I hope there's nobody in the waiting room. And they didn't make sure. I said I wanted that first appointment. I don't want anybody around me, right? So it's just a really different world, and coping with that is just making, you know, as Andrew was saying, sort of taking, you know, being mindful and really taking responsibility for yourself and remembering those around you. So yeah, so it's an ongoing battle, but we have to do it. There's no other choice.
Yeah, I think structure is a very helpful thing. You mentioned structure. I was for the first couple weeks. I was staying up to 5 a.m, eating and watching Netflix, and then the sun would come up, and I'd be like, "Oh, damn, it's time for bed." And so that was not very healthy because I'd sleep all day and miss any chance of going outside during daylight, and it wasn't very healthy. But luckily, I came here, and my brother gets up early to work, so it's kind of forced me to get get back into a more of a normal situation. Also, I'm just sorry to hear about your loss in the family. That must be really hard during these times. So
My condolences to you, Duane.
I do want to keep things moving because I still have so many questions for you all. So here's a good one. So, are we, as Indigenous and queer people, potentially being disproportionately affected by COVID? How do you think the intersection of queer and Indigenous identities are affecting the way we're impacted by the pandemic? So, are we disproportionately affected, either as a queer person or as an Indigenous person or both? And what are your thoughts on those things? Are there any, throw that question to you guys. Was that too broad of a question?
Well, I mean, as you know, as Two-Spirit or Indigenous peoples, we are already at a disadvantage. I mean, I think we were talking about, access to healthcare and services for Indigenous people are subpar in most communities across the country. And so when you're looking at Indigenous Two-Spirited peoples, they are at a disadvantage, I think, in terms of how to access those programs and services that are more in line with their way of being. And I think ultimately there is nothing I've heard come from anywhere, like any federal announcement or any kind of announcement that would see some supports going towards our population to support us. I think everything's been going to the mainstream populations, and we've been left out. And if anybody really needs help, I think our populations really need that support. Even just from information and knowledge sharing. I mean, how many of us do have access to like a phone or a computer or anything like that to actually get general information? And then on top of that, how do we get around to go get our food or our medicine or our whatever services that we require if you're isolated and you don't have the resources that you need to get by. So I think there is. So
Yeah, you touched on a few things like poverty and isolation and access to certain things that certain communities might not have, like having technology to have a Zoom meeting like we're doing right now. How about you, RJ or Andrew? Do you think that Indigenous and queer communities are potentially being disproportionately affected by the pandemic?
I'll speak on my current situation right now, being trying to find housing. Prior to the pandemic, I did have while I didn't have the idea, I had the I guess I was already in the process of making a move to a different area, to Toronto. And then amongst everything that's happened, I've been trying to access Indigenous services, and I've been finding it very difficult to just in terms of contacting people. And I'll even go as far to say this: it doesn't come down to having the access to to services like Zoom, to having cell service, to having Wi-Fi. A lot of what I've experienced, it's just come down to just not having somebody pick up the other end. So for example, for the last 3 days, I've been trying to contact somebody who I'm supposed to be working with to help me make the transition from Ottawa to Toronto. And the first day that I tried calling them, they weren't answering the phone, and I called them well before business hours were supposed to be done. And I know that this person is working is working remotely. The next day, I had to call this person again, and they said, I never got anything until 6 p.m. And I immediately threw back at them, well, I called you at 3:30. And then they said, well, I never got anything until 6 o'clock. Like, okay, all right, okay, let's just move forward from here. And then today I tried calling, and it just came down, like, again, I called twice and there was just no answers. So I, like, personally, I have a lot of frustration coming from this, because it's like, it's automatically like, and I've had the excuse given to me that I'm working from home, that I'm doing this and doing that. And it's like, okay, well, you're working from home, I get it. But I, in the early days especially, I didn't have access to a computer. I didn't have access to ways to get information directly, because I wasn't supposed to be away from home for so many days. I was supposed to go away, come back, and then come back home. And life was supposed to continue. But, as we all know, that's not how things worked. So in a way, it frustrates me that our own services are using the excuse that we are working from home, we're working remotely, we're doing this, we're doing that. And at the same time, I had to figure out how to do so many things from my cell phone that I would normally do from my computer, that, took me the better part of 2-3 days to figure out. And this was in early days. This wasn't weeks later, this or days later. This wasn't weeks later. This was, I'm talking 3-4 days after the pandemic was declared. And I'm being met with, with these statements from professionals that I don't have access, I don't have the resources, I don't have, I don't have my full office space, I don't have this or that. I understand about office space. I understand that completely. However, if you are working remotely from home and we're talking about 2 months later, logistics should be figured out. Things should have been figured out on certain ends, including myself. And I will throw myself into this. There were things that I wasn't fully prepared for, but again, I figured out how to do these things from my cell phone alone. If you have access to a computer and you have access to internet, without question, you should be able to figure these things out. And again, maybe, like, somebody jump in here and tell me that I'm wrong, tell me that, there might be more behind the scenes. But I have run into, situations where, one of my contacts has used the excuse throughout this whole process that they're working from home. And I know that this person full well has access to resources that make it easier, not entirely, like, not, you don't have the same access to resources that you have in an office, but you have the resources to at least start and say, okay, I have this, and I have this. Maybe I don't have 2 or 3 things, but I can figure this out very easily within the next day or so. So my frustration as an Indigenous person has largely come from that, I've had our own come back and say that, they're saying they're giving me the excuses that they're working from home, they don't have resources, they don't have access, or they, like, that they're unable to open PDFs from their own cell phones or from their computers. So I'll just put that out there, and if I'm saying anything, I'm overstepping something, please somebody tell me.
Oh,
But
it sounds like it's a tricky experience to try and find housing in the middle of a pandemic.
it's definitely a tricky experience to try and find housing.
At the best,
However, I'll say this: I've been entirely on my own trying to find housing, and the ones that I've come up with, um, I've been successful. I've been successful in finding places. It's the communication block that comes from our own services that I'm having frustration and difficulty with, and that it's driving me up the wall. Like,
well,
it's
I hope that you're able to find housing and resolve the situation. But please keep us posted.
Oh no, like I'm not saying like, you know, I'm living on, like, you know, I'm sleeping in the gutter or anything, but like I like, you know, it's just that frustration of, you know, these Indigenous services who are supposed to be able to help us and who, you know, should be able, like, who, when they give you a contact, aren't answering 3 or 4 days at a time, and then coming with the excuse of saying, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I, like, you know, we don't have this, we don't have that. When 3 days before I was being given, you know, word that, yes, we're going to do everything, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. And it was just, you know, it's just the frustrating end that our own services, who are still working remotely, who are working from home, and who are given the tools to be able to do at least half of the work, if not even just a little bit of the work that they normally do, aren't doing it. And I'll go as far to even say, myself as an actor and as a performing artist, I don't have all of the, especially back then, I didn't have all the tools that I would normally have, such as, you know, my recording studio or my filming studio, but I had my cell phone at the very least. Do you know what I mean? So that was just one of my biggest frustrations, and I think where even our own are kind of falling short in some way.
Right. Well, I hope things get better for you in terms of the housing issue. RJ, I wonder if you can quickly answer this question, or not necessarily quickly, but if you could address the question.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Um,
One of the things I would say is, like, from also being a person who's like worked in an office and then had to transition into working from home, is someone who like struggles with like dyslexia and ADHD and other learning disabilities. Like, it hasn't been easy, especially to people who have children. And one of the things I've realized throughout this period is like people who have kids are like pretty much at like 10% capacity, if that, being able to do work. And I know a lot of our people do have kids. So like, I think like even during pandemic times, it's super important to be mindful and know that like, regardless if you have access to a really great computer or a cell phone, like it takes a lot of emotional capacity to be able to still manage your workload and still be able to do this kind of work. But to like also go back to the question, I think too, like I already struggled with accessing healthcare as like someone who's Indigenous, but also someone who's transgender. And I feel like trying to access healthcare throughout this period, like my anxiety is like enormously like different than it was before, mostly because like when you go into an office, like, and you never know, are they actually going to know about like transness? Will they know like how to like talk to you and be able to have certain conversations around like health? And I think a lot of the times, like, again, these are things that I think of regularly before going into like the doctors. And I think like too, especially this time, like already we see like racism within healthcare, that a lot of that comes from like values and attitudes that people have just grown up with. So of course, like during these times, I find it's breaking out racism in such a different way from like healthcare providers, because they're also operating from places of fear. And I don't think that justifies like racist behavior in any ways, but I definitely do think like there is a standard that people have about who's more deserving of life, and a lot of the times that's going to be white Canadians. So I think like, especially, yeah, being Indigenous and then adding the layers of being two-spirit, being queer, being trans, like all of these things cause layers in a system that's already pretty shitty to us to begin with. So I think like it's a matter of like, oh, I actually don't even know if I can go to the dentist, because I don't know if they're going to see me as someone who is allowed to be in that space, especially during this time. So I think like, yeah, I've struggled a lot with anxiety, and also like trying to look at everyone I'm trying to get like healthcare from or services from as people who are also experiencing the same anxieties that I am. But also like at the end of the day, sometimes I'm just like, yeah, I'm not gonna leave the house. This just amplifies to me the importance of like being able to stay home, because I want this to end sooner rather than later. But I think it does, like, we all have a part in being able to do that. But it also does just generally outline it outlines an issue that we've already been having within healthcare. And I think it just exacerbates throughout times of crises, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think you said a lot of really interesting things there. That's my train of thought. Especially with, never mind, I lost my train of thought. Duane, did you answer this question yet about
Yes, they did.
Okay, all right, let's move on and keep talking about things. It's 8 o'clock. I think we're supposed to go till 8:30. We can go to 8:30 if we want. So let's keep asking questions here. So, do you think that like non-Indigenous people were kind of better able to prepare for a pandemic than like Black, Indigenous people of color? And I came across this term, I don't know where I heard it, called colonialism. Like the idea of like the coronavirus pandemic merged with histories of colonialism and how there's this pre-existing conditions created by legacies of violence, etc., colonialism, and how those things are connected to the state of the world that we as Indigenous peoples find ourselves in now. So I'm wondering if what you think about, about non-Indigenous people being able, or basically white people, being able to better prepare for an emergency pandemic like we're in today.
I think it's less about like white folks than it is people who are like economically wealthy a lot of the times, because there are still lots of white folks who also like struggle with poverty. And one of the things that I've realized is that especially throughout this period, when you try to go get something you think is just super basic, like toilet paper, why can't we get that for weeks? Dish soap, can't get it for weeks. But who are the populations within like society that is actually able to save money and not have to live paycheck to paycheck? You're usually older, you usually have a certain amount of wealth, you're either born into wealth, but that gives you access to resources to actually be able to stock up for pandemics. And then it literally left so many people with the scraps. During the very beginning part of the pandemic, I was on the phone calls with lots of my friends who were like struggling with anxiety because they didn't know what they were going to eat, because going to the grocery store and seeing all of these shelves that were bare, they're like, this kind of stuff really freaks me out. And I'm like, yeah, no, I 100% understand. And a lot of my friends who have struggled with living in poverty, this is just a reality. And like having to calm folks down around that made me realize, like, actually it's people who have access to wealth who are able to go into these stores and clear things out. And these stores in the very beginning didn't put like a regulation on products, so everything went super quick. So I think like a lot of it goes back to like people who have money and who can just drop $1,000+ on resources, and that's not realistic for people like me, who, even though like there are two people like in my household and we have a dual income, it is still not enough to be able to buy $1,000+ worth of supplies for a month. And honestly, like in the last like 3 months, this was the first week we were actually able to get a big pack of toilet paper, and only because it hadn't sold out yet. So like I think a lot of this goes back to like also being lucky around like knowing the stores in your area, being able to take the precautions to actually go to them. And that's also like a privilege too, to be able to just go to the store whenever you want, because there are tons of immunocompromised people who can't do that, who are still stuck indoors. So I think, again, it always goes back to like capitalism and who holds the most wealth, and they're the ones who are benefiting throughout this pandemic. And that's why people have been starving throughout the past couple of months. And I know there are certain populations too, and a lot of like newcomer and immigrant populations, people have not been able to eat for days, and like children have not been able to eat for days. And a lot of this goes back to like, oh, but who, like, it's the money. It always goes back to like who is able to have access to these things almost immediately. So I think it's a money thing.
I agree. I think that there's definitely a economic reality to things, right? And who has the privilege and access to certain things. Like if you're, know, if you don't have access to a car to be able to drive to the grocery store and fill it with stuff and, you know, stock up. Like if you don't have a car, it's like what you can fit in a backpack. You know? So there's a lot of dynamics to it. Let's keep going. I have another question about like how you think that the COVID could affect like Indigenous culture and even languages. And I'm thinking about like that there was like some communities that or cultures that maybe only have a couple elders left that speak their language fluently. And I'm just thinking about the ways that like how scary that is to like to the possibility of losing our elders and knowledge keepers. And yeah, I'm wondering if you guys can maybe discuss this concept, this idea a little bit.
Well, I was gonna say, I was just reading, I think it was a CBC article where, maybe it not was in CBC, I can't remember what article it was, where the minister responsible for Indigenous peoples, Minister Mark, I think it's Mark Miller, who said the government wasn't going to sort of stop Indigenous peoples from practicing their ceremonies during COVID. And I thought that was very telling, where the mindset of the government is in terms of how they're not going to stop Indigenous people from practicing their culture and so forth. And I thought to myself, I'm like, who are you, Stephen? Who are you in this day and age, you know, have the audacity to actually even make those comments, you know, and you know, Indigenous people have been around for a very, very long time. We've already gone through pandemics, multiple pandemics, and, you know, some of us have been fared very well, and we're starting to see some of the ramifications in different communities, more specifically in northern Saskatchewan, in the Métis and First Nations communities there, where it's beginning to take hold. But, you know, our culture and our language is part of who we are. We're connected to the land. And, you know, not everybody has access to their culture. I mean, many of us are stuck in our homes, and for those of us who are fortunate to have our medicines with us, we can practice those ceremonies in home. In fact, I was out, I guess it was a couple of weeks ago, I went out and got some cedar. Cedar became a very important part of my life, and going out and trying to navigate the bush in the middle, like navigate in the bush at one of the provincial parks, where where I found out that all Indigenous people are all ending up going and getting cedar. It was really beautiful to run into community people. But, you know, we are still practicing our culture and our different ways of gathering medicines, and I'm, you know, we're watching on Facebook, there's jigging, there's dancing, there's missing and murdered Indigenous women. They're doing their dance. So there's still stuff that's going on in terms of culture and resiliency and resistance that still hasn't been put to rest just because of the pandemic. But I think, you know, going back to what you were saying, I think our people are still practicing our culture and our language. Just it may be more in a modified way, just to be, you know, aware and be assured that we are, you know, preserving and taking care of those that are at high risk, like our elders, and those that have lived with compromised or chronic health ailments. So I think, you know, we're still doing it. We're still practicing our culture and language. So.
I almost think that like actually access to language has become significantly more accessible throughout this time, because people have realized that you can actually go on Zoom and host language circles with each other, and finding different ways to connect with people through Zoom. And I think too, like, if we don't do our part in spending time like with ourselves, which I think again, like, is a big part of, you know, like understanding our connection to community and how important that is. I think if anything, that's heightening that awareness through this time, but also like we will be losing knowledge keepers if we continue to gather together. And I think that's like a thing that a lot of folks are trying not to like acknowledge, is that it actually like that I think puts so many communities at risk, and you're putting community members like in those spaces at risk. And I think the best thing we can do during this time to actually preserve these things is to find more creative ways of sharing. And, you know, like who knew that like folks could actually start learning the language together on Zoom, but yet I see all of these classes popping up online, but for some reason this wasn't like accessible earlier, which says a lot about how Indigenous people actually view people who have disabilities. And there are Indigenous folks who have disabilities within our communities that are continuously left out of ceremony because it's just not, they're not physically able to get into those spaces. So I think like, if anything, through this time, I hope like Indigenous folks will take a good hard look at the ways that we treat folks who are disabled within our communities. Because if we're now able to create ways and be creative with actually like including them now, because there's literally no other option, who's to say this can't continue on after? Because there are people who need access to language, but they might not physically be able to get there for a lot of different reasons. And I think like, if culture is healing, why are we restricting it to only a certain type of person, which is typically an able-bodied cishet individual? Like, and I'm tired of seeing like barriers around culture suddenly start to be lifted just throughout these times. Like everyone's getting so creative, but only when it inconveniences the people who already have access to those spaces. So I think like I've been thinking a lot about disability and how we can be like better to one another. And I think it always goes back to like remembering that patience is also a teaching in a lot of our cultures. It's definitely one in Anishinaabe culture. It's like, oh, I think this is like a huge lesson on patience. And I hate patience, but yet I'm here being patient because I know and recognize like this is more important than my feelings in the moment. This is actually about preserving future communities. And that's something that's super, super important to me.
You guys are so smart. I'm so happy to have you guys out here. Let's keep going. We got 10 minutes. I still have so many questions. All right, so my next question is, are there connections between settler colonial resource extraction activities and spread of COVID-19 in Indigenous communities? And I'm thinking about like right before the COVID epidemic started, there was pipeline protests, and that was like dominating the news in Canada, and then that kind of just disappeared and got taken over by the pandemic. So what are the connections between settler colonial resource extraction activities and COVID-19? And are there connections? You guys thought about that at all? I'm thinking about like certain industries continuing to work in certain areas, whether that's in proximity to First Nations communities or setting up man camps with workers going in and continuing to work during the pandemic, despite not necessarily practicing social distancing on those work sites, things like this. You guys thought about this at all? Or did I just already say everything about it? Ideas?
I think just to weigh in, yeah, I think you really just did say a lot of like what's been on my mind anyways, because I think about how in the weeks prior to this, there were social movements amongst Indigenous people, and then all of a sudden COVID hit, and then all of those were blacked out. But I also would I also like to think that in a way, as Indigenous people and as people who are not necessarily prepared, but who do think about things, in the foreground of events, that we already in a way, if not, we already knew that we're vulnerable. If we continue to stay in these environments where we are tightly packed, then yes, as Indigenous people, we are going to be wiped out. One, because of ways that we've already described here. We don't have equal access a lot of the time to resources, to healthcare, to to a lot of different resources. So in a way, like, I think it did affect the social movements. And yes, there are workers still going into these, into the lands, into these communities, and still pushing to work, but in a way, I also think that Indigenous people are being smart in trying to keep distance, in trying to still, I can't say that everything is totally stopped, but I have seen things, posted across social media that are still advocating for these movements, still advocating against, against oil, against oil companies, against power companies, against different companies. It's just come down to the fact that I think what ended up happening is that we had to do what we have always done throughout our histories as Indigenous people, not just since 1492, but long before then. We adapt and we survive. What's going to leave us with the best option, what's going to leave us with the best opportunities, is tangling and staying in these environments where we're tightly packed, or dealing with people from the outside, gonna leave us with, is it going to infect us, is it going to destroy us, versus knowing that yes, this is going to harm us. There are still things that we can do, and we can do that from the side. However, in the physical realm, there's not much we can do right now, but we can still do something. So I do think that, there has been almost a silence on a lot of the movements, in the news, like in national news. But I do think that Indigenous peoples as a whole are doing their best, and their absolute best, to keep these movements alive in any way they possibly can, without endangering their communities, which again comes back to, this is something we've always done. We take care of ourselves, we take care of our own, and we don't, and if it comes down to, do we endanger ourselves and endanger everybody else, or do we adapt to the current situation and live to tell about it, and of course live to carry on our legacies and our traditions and our culture. Not only that, the most, one of the most important things being in my mind right now are movements. Do we live to continue those on? So I think that yes, mainstream media and news outlets have foregone a lot of the movements and a lot of the crises that are going on in our communities, but I also think that we as Indigenous people are carrying those things on.
Yeah, I think that the movement is, the revolution is still going to continue, fighting against settler colonialism and resource extractive industries. It's still happening, and but I do think that the epidemic kind of has dominated topics, and it kind of took away the spotlight from certain issues like the Whitsoy, stuff like that. Do you guys want to, Duane or RJ, do you want to quickly try and address this? Or no?
You did a good job.
All right. I still have so many questions, but I mean, I don't want to keep you guys too much longer. This 8:25, so maybe we can. I mean, there's so many things that I wanted to talk about still. Like, I think that this idea of pre-existing conditions for Indigenous people and for queer people, like mental health, homelessness, the overrepresentation in jails, the housing crisis in the north, clean drinking water and communities. Like, there's so many things that, even like violence against women, missing and murdered Indigenous women, how are women being impacted by and there's so many things that I would love to keep chatting with you guys, but I think we have to, end this at some point. But I do think there are a lot of pre-existing conditions that make us as a community more vulnerable, or as communities, and as queer Indigenous folk, and as Indigenous folk in general. But maybe the last question I'll ask you is maybe a more positive thing to end on. Like, are there any positive stories that you've heard during during these times that you want to share? Just anything positive, or any advice for Indigenous youth out there?
Maybe I'll start. At first, I want to thank you, Howard and RJ and Andrew, for this opportunity. I think it's great for us Indigenous people to get together and to really talk about some of the issues related to spirit peoples, and I use that all inclusive. And I think really one of the things that I think has really come to surface and to mind is the importance of taking care of one another and how that manifests in different ways. If it's just a phone call, or if it's just a sharing of resources, or wiring somebody $100 so they can buy groceries or toilet paper, or giving somebody some toilet paper. Just really reaching out and just being a good ear and a listening ear, and trying to help troubleshoot some of the things that are going on. I mean, what Andrew's going through in terms of housing and the difficulties that, many of us, some of the difficulties that around our partners, and all these other aspects of isolation really plays on us. So we really need to be good to each other and look out for one another, because these are precedent times, and this brings the best thing to come out of this is the best out of humankind, and that is to be kind to one another. Use the kind in human to really move forward and push forward as we look at the new normal going forward. I think it's a great pause. I call it the great pause is what I'm using. I don't know, anybody wants to coin that? That's me. No, just kidding. But it's the great pause. Everybody has had to pause, and they've had to reflect, and they've had to really think about what's really, really important. Is it the $1 million home? Is it your career? Is it making money? Really, at the end of the day, it's just really about being with those that you love and connecting with those that you love, and being mindful and helpful when you can. So thanks. I really appreciate this time, and I hope we get another opportunity to do this again.
Thanks, Duane. Those really beautiful words. I think you're right. It's all about relationships and maintaining those healthy relationships with our friends and family. So how about you two, RJ and Andrew? Any positive stories that you've heard during the pandemic, or any last final things you want to share?
For me, I think largely it's just been the reconnection with with the things that I like to do. It's reiterated so many times across so many different platforms that we're going through a really rough time, but I don't think we should let that overshadow that this is a time that we should connect with ourselves. We should be connecting with our family, and we should be building ourselves, and I think that, yes, rest is an important thing during this time, because a lot of us maybe didn't have the chance to rest beforehand. And, for some, maybe it's not a time to rest right now either, but for those of us who have that ability, to really sit back and reflect, this is a time of reflection. Think about the things that you liked to do before that maybe you didn't have time for. And when you have gone back to those things, and maybe you're satisfied. In my personal life, I'm satisfied with the things that I return to, because the thing that I'm satisfied with the most is that I didn't forget how to do them. I still know how to do them, and I can execute them well, but still, maybe take it upon yourself to take something up, learn a new skill. I know some days it can be hard. I know some days, it doesn't feel like it, and that's all right. But on the days where you feel like being productive, or on the days where you feel like, you're feeling all right, take the time and do something that is going, that adds to your skills, or that adds to your life, or that builds a relationship between you and someone else, or between yourself and your family. Don't let any of this time slip by for the simple reason that, let's be realistic. This is a small, tiny, dark cloud that's come over top of us. And when we come out of it, we're going to have the chance to share so many different skills, so many different reflections, and so many ideas that, it will be able to help us in the future and after we come out of this. Don't let this slip by, on the days, and I'll reiterate, on the days that you feel well enough to do something, get out and do it, push push. And even if it's just going and sitting on a balcony or going and sitting outside in the sunlight, that's an accomplishment for the day. But just don't let any of the time that we have for ourselves slip by, because we don't know after this if we will have that time to do this again, and to be able to build upon our own selves and our own lives and our own skills.
All right. Thanks for those good words, Andrew.
Yeah.
Well, RJ, how about you? And any positive things positive last words you want to share with our adoring fans out there?
Honestly, it's just, I think, really seeing how like the different communities I am are able to show up for each other in very like various capacities, and just watching like different friendships bloom over like different hobbies, I think has been also like tons of fun. And also just like solidifying like my friendships and even like my current relationship. And all of these things are things like I didn't necessarily like question before, but like they definitely hold a different type of appreciation when you're also like going through something that's intense and struggling with others and still finding hope in the small things. So I'm thankful for like the organization I work for being like incredibly realistic with us and our capacity around work. And like I'm super thankful for my friends and being able to create like these very close and tight knit like quarantine groups, so that we're still able to like maintain contact with folks, because we're very transparent about any time we've had contact with folks, and also being willing to like kind of take the risks that are necessary to also maintain community, because that I think that's also something that's important. But yeah, honestly, like really, like I guess the last thing I'll say is like give this special shout out to like Animal Crossing, because that's actually just made this a whole lot more fun. And I feel like, yeah, that's it. I made a group called like Animal Crossing New Horizons, like pals of unceded Algonquin territory, and we all like gather on this game and share time and space with each other and like give each other things. And it's just been like a new way to explore like creative avenues. And yeah, I've just been able to explore like communication and ways that I can include other people throughout this time, and like what are ways that like I can remain and continue to do the things that I'm doing today with the understanding that like, yeah, we need to really transform how we include folks who are disabled, and like not doing things halfway anymore, and make sure that we can be inclusive. So yeah, I'm super lucky again throughout this time. Even though I had to like get a tooth extracted through this time, I was still taken care of. So, and I think that's like testament to how good things can be throughout this time. I did also go get ice cream today from the store, so I'm also very appreciative of that. My partner isn't, because I'm lactose intolerant, and I intentionally didn't get the lactose intolerant and stuff. But again, enjoy the little things in life.
Right. Well, Chimigwech, Kimigwaya. Big thanks, everyone. Oh, there's Robert. He's back to say goodbye for us, I guess. Thanks,
I wanted to give you an opportunity, Howard. First of all, thank you for doing such a wonderful job moderating. But did you also want to answer the last question? Any final thoughts or positive thoughts you want to leave us with?
Oh, no, I'm just the moderator. I can't share my thoughts.
You're welcome to.
Yeah, well, positive things. I was thinking about a friend of mine, Emmy. She lives in Toronto, and she's been making art, these giant pigeons, and putting them in fences in the grocery stores in Toronto. and they're like, the pigeons are saying like, thank you to the essential workers, thank you to grocery store workers, thank you to, people that are still working, thank you to nurses, and it's a really positive story of just an artist doing something to say thank you, and I think that's a really good story. So shout out to my friend Emmy. Good job, yay Emmy.
Nice.
Yeah, and thank you, Robert, and to Max Ottawa for inviting us to do this really fun.
No need to thank me nor Max. The pleasure was mine and ours. I was taking notes as you all were speaking, and thank you for reminding me and hopefully everyone who listened the importance of listening. And I think that's what really came forth. Thank you for everyone's honesty. Thank you for your vulnerability. So many great points were made. So many personal stories were shared. And hopefully those will go out to the community and help us get through this time. So that being said, we're all finished. So thank you, Duane. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Roland. Thank you, Howard. Howard, thank you for taking the extra time to moderate and come up with such great questions. That takes a lot of time and effort. I didn't want the conversation to end. It's just because it's time. We have things to get to, but certainly be happy to arrange and organize a part 2 of this conversation because, as you said, there's so many more things to talk about. And on that note, thank you, everyone. Thank you for attending behind the scene. We'll be back in June with the French presentation. And if this continues, we'll let you know. This conversation, that is. So thank you again. Merci, miigwech.
To be glad to everyone.
Alrighty.
Thank you very much for the platform, Robert.
Oh, thank you, Andrew. It was a pleasure hearing your thoughts and words.